Hi, welcome to Represent This, Black Bodies, Green Space, and Radical Self-Care, a conversation with Alice Randall and Carolyn Finney. So before introducing our speakers, we would like to begin with Middlebury College's land acknowledgement. We pause to acknowledge that Middlebury College sits on land which has served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. The Western Abenaki are the traditional caretakers of these Vermont lands and waters, which they call Indakina or homeland. We remember their connection to this region and the hardships they continue to endure. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to the Abenaki elders and to the Indigenous inhabitants of Turtle Island, past and present. We give thanks for the opportunity to share in the bounty of this place and to protect it. We are all one in the sacred web of life that connects people, animals, plants, air, water, and earth.
After a conversation and reflection with the Abenaki leader, we also want to note that there is no singular correct template for creating land acknowledgements. They cannot be manufactured for general use by any institution. Land acknowledgements are meant to be deeply personal, cultivated for everyone's lived experiences and an ongoing learning process. We must individually put in the work to create and build onto land acknowledgements that reflect respective relationships with people, nature, and place.
Furthermore, while the land acknowledgement is an important step towards Indigenous sovereignty, we must not forget that the ultimate goal is to give land back. In showing the necessary respect to the Indigenous community, we must also center our thoughts and actions around reciprocity and reparations.
We have to be cognizant of the fact that decolonization is not a metaphor that many of us are settlers perpetuating harm on stolen land, and we need to be vigilant of co-optation from particular institutions. Decolonization is unsettling but absolutely necessary. Middlebury College, if they are able to be true allies of the Abenaki, and if they are sincerely concerned with Indigenous sovereignty, must inevitably give this stolen land back.
This land acknowledgement was written in collaboration with our peers Megan Tan and Andres Oyaga and informed by the teachings of Abenaki activist Judy Dow. Thank you. And now we'll be introducing our speakers.
So first, I would just like to say that I'm filled with gratitude for the opportunity to take part in this discussion with all of you today. I would like to introduce to you all Dr. Carolyn Finney. After her decade-long career in acting in Nepal, Dr. Finney decided to travel the world backpacking through Africa and Asia before settling in Nepal. These experiences changed the trajectory of her career and have ultimately put her in a position to be here speaking with us today. Professor Finney has done amazing work around bringing recognition to the perils that marginalized communities face in outdoor spaces. She has expressed her concerns about environmental injustice in many ways, including through literature, public speaking events, and through various works detailing her own experiences with the environment. Though all of her work has been instrumental in enacting change, one of her most acclaimed pieces of work is her book Black Faces, White Spaces, which was published in 2014. In this book, Dr. Finney invites the audience to reimagine the relationship that African Americans have to the great outdoors, emphasizing the effects of slavery and Jim Crow in determining who belongs in natural spaces. One of Dr. Finney's favorite sayings that I would like us all to consider today is whose story counts. This question brings us not only to ponder the ways in which we currently think about the world, but it also gives us space to think about whose stories have been invalidated.
And I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Alice Randall, to you all today. Professor Alice Randall is a writer in residence, professor of African American and Diaspora Studies and English at Vanderbilt University. She graduated from Harvard University with a degree in English and holds an honorary doctorate from Fisk University. She's the author of multiple published novels, including New York Times bestseller, The Wind Done Gone, a reinterpretation of the American classic novel, Gone with the Wind. She co-wrote the award-winning cookbook, Soul Food Love, a largely vegetarian and health-conscious history of 100 years of cooking and eating in one African-American family. Her fourth novel, Ada's Rules, pays special attention to diet culture and body image. The book received positive recognition from the National Institute of Health. Most recently, she has published Black Bottom Saints, a literary tribute to Detroit's Black Bottom neighborhood, Professor Randall teaches courses on soul food, African American children's literature, African American film, and creative writing. In addition to this, Professor Randall is an award-winning songwriter and scholar of Black presence in feminism and country music. She co-wrote one of the first ever recorded country songs about the environment called Who's Minding the Garden, which was released in 1992 and recorded by country legend Glenn Campbell. Professor Randall is widely recognized as one of the most significant voices in 21st century African American fiction. She's an investigator of the uncovered narrative and activist for the underrepresented. It's an absolute honor for her to be joining us today.
I think that's us, right? Mel, Sydney, thank you. That was great introduction, setting the tone, setting the stage as it gets dark up in here in Burlington, Vermont, where I'm at. Alice, where are you at again? You're in Tennessee.
I'm in Tennessee, down by the riverside. I can see the river from here.
Yeah, nice, nice. Well, we got sun today, so I'm not feeling too badly about it. I know you always have sun down there. So I'm really, okay, so I had to think about where I want to start. Like, I know I'm gonna put the question out there, but first what I want to say to everybody is, I only met Alice actually, now it's only been maybe 2 months tops that we met, and we actually met on the phone, but I've known who Alice Randall is for some time. Some of you may have heard me talk about how I'm working on this one-woman show right now called The N-Word Nature Revisited, where I imagine myself in conversation with John Muir. Well, 4 years ago when I started thinking about that, the inspiration for me to be thinking about that was, let's show it again, The Wind Done Gone by Alice Randall. Because even though she wrote this in the early 2000s when I read it, it was 2016, I was going to a geography conference, so a few thousand people. In 2016, it was the 100-year centennial for the National Park Service. So at the time I was serving on the National Parks Advisory Board, and a number of us geographers were asked to be on this plenary session where we had to answer the question, is John Muir still relevant? And I had some time, like that was the homework. I had to come in, have my 10 or 12 minutes prepared, ready to go. And I was thinking about how I wanted to answer it. And then I started thinking about her book, the way in which she took Gone with the Wind, a kind of iconic, and I said that in some big old quotes, novel about the South that sort of centers whiteness in a very particular way, largely through the lens of the character Scarlett O'Hara, if you've ever seen the movie or read the book, right? Slavery is kind of a backdrop, right, to the experience of this white family and this white person in particular. You can see I have some issues with it, but that's for another conversation. But what I love is that she got the idea, well, what if Gone with the Wind was told from the perspective of a Black woman? And that's why she wrote The Wind Done Gone in Sinara, you know, her mulatto half sister. And I just went, like my mind went boom. And then I thought, what if I took one of John Muir's books and imagined it from the perspective of a Black woman? And so that's really took me down that path. So for the last 4 years, every time I tell somebody about it, I'm like, Alice Randall, but I never met Alice Randall. But how Alice Randall inspired me. And then through a series of fortunate coincidences, you know, somebody reached out to me to do something else. And I told them this story and they were like, I know Alice Randall. I told Alice, next thing I know, Alice is calling me on the phone and we're both just like, wow, 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 wow.
And I teach Carolyn in my course on Black environmentalism at Vanderbilt. Just this semester, I've taught Black faces, white spaces, and that book, where I found myself in the pages of it, helped inspire Black bottom saints. Because I have to say, your brilliant title, Carolyn, is always brilliant, represent this. You hadn't said those words to me, but I read that book, and when I was writing Black Bottom Saints, I was looking for the environmental saints, the saints where land and water meant so much to them.
Yes.
But that's because you had so articulated the dilemma of lack of representation, not even a lack of experience, lack of representation of ours inhabiting of a wide variety of spaces.
Well, I was just, you know, something that I wasn't seeing. And so we're getting ahead. Well, actually, this is a perfect entree for me to put into the question, the first question, so we can figure out how we want to come to it. But the first question is, What does it mean to be who we are doing this work at this moment? What does it mean to be who we are doing this work at this moment? Ha! I got a lot to say about it, but you go first.
Well, that is a really big question. I'll take a small bite of the apple and throw it to you, and then you can throw. I want to start with where you mentioned Gone with the Wind and the Wind Done Gone. One of the things I rarely get to say about that book is in my Wind Done Gone, the plantation house is called Tata.
Oh.
And Tata is, as opposed to Tara, is a word for breast. And Ta also means you're welcome and thank you among people that are equal and honoring each other. So if a child gives a grandparent something in Black English, the grandparent may say ta or tata.
Oh, okay.
You are welcome, thank you. It's gifted and gifting at the same time. So one, to be Black in this moment and to be us, I identify as a Black woman.
Yes.
Is to inhabit a particular body, a particular history, and a shared world. And I am moved by those statements that you all made at the very beginning, so I'm not going to pass by them.
Yes.
The statement about reciprocity, the statement that has something to do with reckoning and reconciliation. And though I'm only virtually at Middlebury right this moment, I want to virtually say that I, as all Americans, owe so much to Indigenous peoples, and that the complicated stories of Black people in these Americas, but in First Peoples are First People, and we owe so much to them, to our, to this history, to the stolen land. We have the issue of stolen bodies. They have issues of stolen. There's so much theft. And what is wonderful in this moment, so to be me now is to not know what to do, that I am virtually standing on stolen land, but to at least care and want to do.
Yes. Yes.
And to figure out what our common cause is. And I mean, everyone's common cause, but to be us in this moment, to be me in this moment, is be concerned with my own health, physical and mental, and to be concerned with my community's health, physical and mental, and to be concerned with the globe's health, the environmental, or physical and mental or political in that sense.
Yes.
And to realize that it's circles and circles and circles, and they're all literally interrelated.
Yes.
You know, those weird things that, Black people are the fastest growing vegan movement in the United States. And if cows were a country, they'd be, I think, the 3rd or 5th largest bad gas creators. That my choice to eat an increasingly more and more vegetable diet has global impact on how clean our air is. It may mean that somebody is not dying of asthma in Chicago next year.
It's so weird that you were saying that, because really maybe an hour ago I was just reading an article in the Atlantic that was talking about how we could be eating differently, and I've read about the idea of beef, but that was the first thing they said. That is, like, if you cut down or cut out beef, understanding the methane and all the issues around that would be something that would change. So, but I can't start from food. I love food, but I can't start from what does it mean to be me. That I have to start from thinking about. Lately, I've been ranting a little bit, so I spend my days, in part, I've been spending the last few years choosing to have these kinds of conversations around race, difference, environment, power, privilege, identity, belonging, land, reparations, decolonization, whatever it is, and trying to show up in that conversation really authentically. And for me, I can only do it in a layered fashion, in a relational fashion. I can't have only an intellectual conversation about it. I have to have one that I show up in it. The stories are overlaid. Like my being, my body, my psyche is actually in relationship to everybody else's, including the earth. And so that means I am affected. And the thing that I can be always sure of and feel safe about saying is how I feel about it first. Then I kind of can come into relationship with everything else to consider. The geographer in me thinks in scale. So then I'll think of, well, what's the next scale up? The family, the community, however people, the body, whatever it is, I start thinking beyond myself. And, you know, I'm tired. This has been some kind of ride. I'm just saying. So let's just pretend for a moment that we don't have a pandemic, or that's ridiculous because we have one, right? That's kind of layered.
We've been locked down for a year. I feel like I have been in isolation.
I have been in isolation, right? I live alone, right? I live alone. I'm like, what is happening? I'm talking to people all the time. But the other piece of it for me is I'm talking to people all the time about these issues. And I haven't taken enough time to understand how that impacts me to be talking about it all the time. You know, I love this, that I get to do this as work. I'm passionate about it. So really, I couldn't stop myself. I'm sure I'm talking about it while I'm sleeping, you know, but nobody's here to tell me, are you still talking about it? But I know I'm talking about it somewhere. It's in my head. It's everywhere. And it helps feed me. It helps pay the rent. You know, it aligns me with fabulous people like you. I'm meeting all kinds of people, some I've wanted to meet, some that I've known, but we were coming back around this work because I think there's this moment of reckoning in a very particular way. And those of us who've always had some awareness of it, engagement with it, either because it's personal or otherwise, or both. I mean, it is a moment that's really hard to ignore. And I'm in some kind of denial about the impact that it has on me. You know, I think about, when I always say to people, the shorthand for me is to say that I'm tired. It doesn't actually mean that what I am is only, or that really that I'm tired. It's just that it's easiest for me just to say, I'm tired, because sometimes I just go, oh my God, well, if I really have to think about it, I'm in emotional turmoil. Some days it's emotional turmoil. It's, waking up at 4 a.m. because I'm stressed out about what all these things mean. I worry about my own worthiness and sense of belonging and all the things that I'm asking of everyone else. I'm concerned about it for myself. I cannot lie. Like, I'm talking about them in part because I'm thinking about them all the time. I'm thinking, I'm 61, so what happens? If I live, I hope, for another like 30 years or so, will anybody actually care? Will I be alone? Is it down on me to actually create community? Is that the drive, to create community? But then you complicate it by talking about race. Is it really my job to tell everybody about race? But I don't know how not to tell anybody about race. Really, they should already know about race because it's always been here all the time. I just was talking to somebody today who, I won't say who it is, but we were just going on about a particular institution, not Middlebury, and just the idea that for a lot of liberal leaning, well-meaning, smart, nice white people, I'm just going to say it, that they believe that some of them believe they're exempt from this because they think they're not, part of the conversation, or they don't have to be, or maybe because of other issues of difference that makes them exempt, or there's all these different ways, that I'm going, oh my God, okay, so first of all, how do I, climb over that wall? Like, I have to think of my backdoor strategy, like, how do I get in there without knocking them? Like, I don't want to call them out just to call them out, right? I want to call them out to call them in. So what do I have to do? What machinations, what gymnastics, let's be smart and funny. How do I have to duck and weave? How often do I need to use my story? How do I have to remain authentic all the time and think that it's not going to have any impact on me? I mean, Alice?
It has an impact. You know what? It's funny that everything you said it differently than I'd say it, because you are an amazing actress as well as a professor and person. No, I haven't answered that question about that conversation, because I get that too. This people who think they are exempt, or I have also people, and I'm sure you've received this too, who think, they basically say, Alice, you're very privileged. And there are certain privileges I have, or they say, why should your daughter have some kind of benefit of affirmative action? You went to Harvard, she went to Harvard. And I have an answer to that often opens people's eyes. And I say, you're right, my daughter is very privileged. She has a smart mother who adored and respected her, and she's born smart. But let me ask you a question. And I challenge everyone on this Zoom who's listening. By the time you were in 7th grade, by the time you were in 9th grade, by the time you were in 12th grade, had you ever had a teacher, of a subject area that was your race? And the answer is, I have never asked that question of a white person. They have not had a teacher. I have literally, if there's on this Zoom, if there's someone, every time I've asked this question in front of thousands of people.
Yeah.
But I say, when you want to think my daughter is so privileged, and she was a stunning student, and she got to an 800 on the SAT, I will just say this.
Oh,
but my child got to Harvard never having had a Black subject area teacher in her whole life. And when she was in 5th, 6th, and 7th and 8th grade, all of middle school, she was the only Black person in accelerated math across the whole, not in her class, across the whole school.
Right.
I had to send my child away to New Hampshire so she could meet some brilliant Black women who did math. I said, if you've had to send your, I said, this wasn't in the 19th century or the 20th century.
Right.
This was in the 21st century.
Right.
I had to send my child, I live in Tennessee, but for the hope of her having a Black woman, a girl like her in her class, in her case, Nikoba, who is now a surgeon at UCLA, and her parents, who are both MD, PhDs, had to send her to New Hampshire. That's how racism works in America.
Yes.
And so many things to deconstruct that I had to send my child out of the South to the North, to another place, so she had a chance to see someone that looked like her in the class and still didn't have a teacher.
Yes.
So when you talk about Black faces, white spaces, it's not just it's not Zion. It's not just these parks.
Yes. No, I'm talking about it. When I started working on that as a dissertation in 2003, one of the primary things that drove me to look beyond academic research as a way to understand the Black experience was I hardly found anything in the library, the college library, about Black people in the environment. There was some really good work on environmental justice by, the brilliant Dr. Robert Bullard, as well as a couple of other folks like that, but that was it. Compared to all the other stuff that was in there about nature, environmental science, conservation, it went on and on. There were a ton of books, but nothing by or about Black people, right? And that's what I thought. It's not that we don't have knowledge. It's not that we don't care, but I had to look beyond that and remember that not that long ago, we weren't allowed in spaces of knowledge production. Not all that, and actually, and I'm gonna say it, in some places today.
This is an academic knowledge production.
Thank you.
So on the other hand, I say that you find embedded in Motown soul songs many discussions of rivers, waters, mountains, that we have given testimony and witness.
Yes.
In our spirituals and even in our pop music.
Yes. Wynton Marsalis has he has a whole, I think it's like an operetta almost that he created around land and slavery. And, yes, it's poetry, it's music, it's art in the broadest sense, everything from quilt making to how you're cooking your food, to the paintings, to the visual arts, to memoir, to, oral history, storytelling. It just goes on and on, the ways in which Black people have collectively and individually created a sense of ourselves in place. In part because I think it's something we're driven to do as human beings. So I think there's some common ground there about the way that we all want to show up and have a sense that we are here, but also I think as Black people, it's very particular in this country. When you have a history of being enslaved, when you have a history of being dehumanized, and if you think that dehumanization is over, and I can't believe anybody would still say that after this year, but I'm just saying it's not. And the way that behavior has been legislated, you can see I'm riled up already.
And I feel that in the novel world, one of my favorite characters in Black Bottom Saints is this woman, Cordy. And it says, before her hands were jeweled, they were paws. She'd been worked like an animal. So I think that one of the biggest disruptions in the Black psyche that I've had to mend in myself to speak, I want to keep this an intimate conversation because you've invited that intimate conversation, is that I have that whole impulse to the one with nature, that I am one with nature. That is part of my elemental personal impulse. At the other hand, because part of the experience of being enslaved in America was that you were not an enslaved human being, but we were less than human, we were animals. I look for all the ways to separate myself from animal life. I look for all the ways to separate myself from animals. Although there's a part of me that feels a complete union with all nature, and that is an African spiritual aesthetic and tradition that's common in many pieces of the continent that I personally am drawn to. But at the same time, my experience of bodies hanging from the trees, my experience of people being enslaved and working, tilling gardens, my experience of having most of my grandmothers or great-grandmothers conceived in kitchen rapes, Black women, domestic servants, raped in slavery and freedom by white men, kitchens, fields, nature feels dangerous. And it feels like something I need to distinguish myself from and bond only with books and high culture to show I am human, not animal.
Yes.
So it's a very contorted relationship. And one of the things I adore about you is that we are both, you've tried to disrupt that. And and we are almost exactly, we're both 61 years old right now. And we have both disrupted it. I'm going to out something that I just find this weird coincidence, that we both have gone on vision quest when we were trying to decide whether to end a marriage.
That's exactly right.
I went on when I was in my 30s, 32, 33 years old, I went hiking for a month, mainly alone in southwestern Utah. I was out, I don't like meat, but I walked so long, I smelled some rosemary and saw a rabbit and I thought dinner. I was about to, I was hiking in this far along that I saw a rabbit and thought food. And this is not, I don't eat rabbit. The point is, and where did you go hiking?
Well, so I was 27, 28 at the time, and that was with the guy I was married with and young. That's when we took the backpacking trip around the world, which changed everything. But when we came back and got separated, then I had to prove I could do it myself. And so I did 6 months in East and Southern Africa. So it was Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania and Madagascar, just to prove I could be on my own. But there was something about that being mobile. You know, being mobile, I find the movement and the mobility and being out in the world. And to be honest with you, it's like I didn't think about it as out in nature because we are always in nature. And a lot of the hiking and trekking I did was like climbing Mount Kenya and doing all that stuff people also would describe it in recreational terms in a very particular way. But I wanted to find out what the boundaries of myself really is, because I lived in a country that tried to tell me who I was my whole life up to that point, especially in the acting business, because that even it shrunk me in a lot of ways as someone who identifies as a Black woman, right? And what that actually meant. And the meanings didn't give me a lot of room to breathe. And for me, and I'm just going to say it, maybe you have this experience, it wasn't just in the diverse white community, it was also in the Black community. The sense of, what I understand now is the way within many of us as a group have been trying to figure out, who are we? What does it mean? Black power? Like, who do we get to love? Who do we get to be with? What do we do to show our Blackness? Do we have to show our Blackness? How do we hold on to our Blackness and not have it appropriated? Because it's always appropriated if you culturally put it out there. And then you bring in the gender thing, and boy, messes with those power dynamics. Traditional gender. So we don't even have to get to the more fluid understanding of what gender is, but even the more traditional forms of that. What am I allowed to do? How am I allowed to show up as a Black person? And wanting all the time to be connected and to belong. But because I'm stubborn as hell, Alice, and I have a feeling you are too, I wanted to do it on my terms. So
you're an original. What's funny, I think of us both, I feel as Black hippies. That's a subgenre that is
what do they call that? Is it a bippy?
I like Black hippies. Plum Street was the neighborhood for that in Detroit. There's some of that in Seattle. And I think that I have honestly experienced that piece that sometimes, particularly I was born in Detroit, and the part of Black Detroit when I was a little girl that I was part of was very Black and very inclusive of a wide variety of Black people. But then I was taken away with my mother to Washington. And when I came back to Detroit, there's a phrase in Japanese that translates for a Japanese person who spent a lot of time abroad, that they smell like butter. I feel like people felt like I smell like oatmeal, or I smell like something, that I came back to Black Detroit from my time in hippie Washington, and they no longer, they no longer recognized me. And that was very hard when at times when I felt like certain kind, unrecognized in both the Black, white, and Asian world at times, that in times I don't feel recognized. As I've gotten older, one of the joys of getting older and of more people understanding that race is a construct, I think more and more in the Black community, there's a deep and wide recognition. There are lots of ways to be Black, from the bougie to the hippy dippy, to the street and the sedity and the scholarly and all the ways in between. And I think that has become, but there are also ways in which in all of those identities, that, that the one thing I don't feel free to do in America is I'm not sure that I think that all my national parks are really safe to me.
Yes.
And I don't know that I think that they're rural Oregon and rural Wyoming are necessarily safe for me. And what's harder is I'm not sure if that's projection of my traumatized history as a Black American and strange fruit, or that that's reality.
And I don't think it's one or the other. I think that it can, I think it's this is what I feel. It's like, I have to consider that option, because the truth is, if a Black woman like Breonna Taylor can get shot in her bedroom while sleeping, I'm just going to use the extreme version. There's a story, a true story, and I don't have the quote with me, a couple of years ago, Morgan Dixon and they started Girl Trek in 2012. It's the largest nonprofit. It's focused on Black women's health, and it gets Black women in the outdoors. And I was a Facebook friends. I'm just blanking on the name of the second woman. I don't want to disrespect. The two women started this, and she posted a couple of years ago. She took a group of Black women hiking in Colorado in the Rocky Mountain National Park. And she posted this thing about a cop in the park with his gun, stopping their van full of Black women after they've been hiking for 3 days, telling her that she was drunk, threatening her. And I often read the full quote as she wrote it to audiences, because I want to remind them that sometimes that's what happens. So it may not be the extreme where you will get attacked, physically attacked or raped or killed or beaten, but there's this whole other place in the middle where you can just, it be at one point where you were elated coming off, 3 days hiking in some places beautiful as the Rocky Mountains, and then get stopped within the park boundaries by someone whose job it is actually to make not only care of the parks, but care for you in the parks, and then challenge your right to be there. Even though this woman's been on the cover of like magazines and all this other stuff, her environmental bona fides are all there, but her human bona fides were always there, right? And for me, that incident said more about him than it did about her. And so I think I can understand, because I have those same feelings. I am more inclined to go halfway around the world, in part because people don't know how to read me in different parts of the world. That it's a little murkier for them to read who I am if they're not embedded or have a true sense or strong sense of what American history is all about. But here, people don't always read me right either, but they're not, I have never been, how can I put this? They may not know how to read me, but it's not like I am mistaken to be something better than I am. That's the only way I can kind of put it without kind of hitting it hard on its head. The other thing that I wanted to say, that when I want to go back to the hippie, I'm hung up on the hippie because I realize if I'm authentically right, I'm not fully hippie. I'm not fully hippie because there's some nice things that I like, because I grew up. In growing up in New York on that estate, So during the course of the year, I went to a predominantly white high school where there was a lot of money in that high school. It was predominantly Jewish, actually. A lot of money, a lot of my friends. I was exposed to that wealth all the time because I lived on that estate, and the people my parents worked for, it wasn't our wealth, but you kind of see it. It's always there on the edge, this way you live, what looks nice. I mean, at one point, my father was chauffeuring one of the owners of the estate in his silver Rolls Royce. He used to drop me and my brother off at public school in that thing, which I know is part of the reason I got bullied by some of the Black girls there later on, right? It's hard to tease that out. But in the summertime, we drove down to Floyd, Virginia to visit all my cousins and aunts and grandparents, because that's where my parents grew up they were poor working class families. And I loved it. So one of the ways I always differentiated it was through music. During the year in high school, I remember friends of mine, really good people in high school. I remember one of my first birthdays, 14, 15, my first year in high school, I was given a copy of the Beach Boys, a double album, one of the Beatles, that blue album, and also there was a red double album. I had Carly Simon, like I'm just calling out Elton John. At home, my dad and mother are listening to B.B. King and Ray Charles. And I love B.B. King, Ray Charles, Robert Johnson, all the blues. In the summer, I'm going down. This is all in the 60s and 70s, y'all. So it's like, it's the OJs, it's Aretha, I mean, all that. And I found that I crossed easily because I love music. Mm-hmm. So the thing that I will defend is what some people will say, you have a strange taste, or I say it's just eclectic. Because you know what? I like good music. Things that if it hits me right, it can be a country. I like some good country. I don't, Charlie Pride. I always think of the Black country singer is, at least back in the day, was Charlie Pride. And my parents used to say, and I was never good enough singer for this, but at one point my father was like, why don't you try to be a country singer like Charlie Pride? Because I used to do musical theater, and I was like, no, that's not going to work for me. But, there was also something about, I wanted to feel like I could cross those borders comfortably, respectfully, and learn from it and enjoy it and engage it, not have to defend it. What does it indicate? If I tell you I either like the OJs or like the Beach Boys, does it have to be one or the other? Because it's not one or the other. You know what? I can sing a song from both right now and enjoy them both. So
I love that. Well, I think that shows you have a taste for genius, because both of them have. I think
that's everything to make it sound good about me. I love it.
You have a taste for genius. I was like Stevie Wonder, because I think it's that embraced by almost all groups. I love Stevie Wonder for that reason, that he that almost everyone in that category. Because I think that one of the things about aesthetics, when I moved from Detroit to Washington, that it moved from a world that loved the Temptations and Supremes to a world that privileged Bob Dylan, and could not understand that the Temptations and the Supremes in their matching outfits were actually brilliant too.
Yes,
it's interesting. My Detroit was more prepared to see that Bob Dylan had something to offer, although he wasn't what they loved most. But my Washington world really did not get the Supremes and the Temptations, though they, of course, got Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, and Stevie Wonder. So I think that, and what I love about country, and your audience may not know that I am a country songwriter. I wrote a #1 country song, but one of the reasons I wanted to work on country, because it had so much hidden Black experience.
Yes.
Ray Charles, you talk about Charlie
Ray Charles.
But the greatest, biggest, first huge country album of all time was Ray Charles' Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. And so when we think about land, we also have to think about air. And when we think about air, we need to think about airwaves. If you were a Black person in the South in the 40s, the only radio you had was country radio. There was no Black radio. Black radio stations start to become in the late 50s, in the 60s. There was no Black radio in Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas. People had to listen to country. But on those country records were a lot of Black players that weren't acknowledged. And from the very beginning, we have people like Lil Hardin Armstrong, who played on Blue Yodel #9, was a Black woman born in Memphis. Wow. So our whole, I love that, even though I love the truth that we all have one globe. And if we want to understand something about our general humanity, it relates to sharing that thing. And then we have these very original lives that everyone is so uniquely them. We are all snowflakes. We may not all be fragile, but we are not all white, but we are all different than everyone else. So the question is, racism, we think about race we know is a construct.
Right.
It is so constructed. But when we know that race is a construct, that cuts in two different ways. One way is it's a construct, and it's a lot of, it is nothing that has been used as everything to persecute people. But it's not the elemental identity of a person.
Yeah.
It is part of the elemental experience. And in all the world that we know in American life, it's a fundamental aspect of identity. I don't consider myself to be anyway part Black. I am 100% Black. I was raised in Black culture, on Black language, Black food. I have chosen to find for myself a world of experience. It is liberating to me, off the south coast of Chile, to paddle out in a rubber boat to see the inside of an iceberg. And in no small part, because inside the iceberg, nobody was telling me what it meant for me to be Black.
Yes.
It's just getting to define that Black is a person who wants to go to the end of the earth to love their Blackness and feel that no one else is determining some part of their life because of them.
Yes. And there's something, in connecting that to thinking about stories about the environment, and that first part that represent this is also for me about what stories we value and whose experiences we value. There's been a lot written about how Black, and I would venture to guess Black and brown folks in this country, because so many of us were brought up where we go to school, we didn't have teachers who looked like us, sort of representing us. We didn't see that representation on the silver screen when we talk about stories that are told, human stories that are told, but not seeing people who look like us within those human stories. I know that I learned how to identify with anybody. I learned how to identify with anybody in books, in movies, in what I was being educated in part because I wanted to connect. And what I could see through their difference was their humanity. But also, if I didn't, then there'd be nobody for me to connect with, because growing up, I wasn't getting enough of the other, at least initially, right, to get that. And that has started to change over time. But what I think that is also true, that for the diverse white community, and I say because I know that's incredibly diverse, it hasn't always been the same experience, because, part of sometimes I find the resistance to telling a story, and then putting a Black or brown character in its place, whether it is to take a classic like Gone with the Wind, or for me to take John Muir's 1,000-Mile Walk Through the Gulf and imagine it through the lens and experience of a Black woman, for me does not diminish the experience of Scarlett O'Hara. It doesn't diminish the experience of John Muir, whether it's a fictional or real person. It actually expands what we understand. For me, it's an opportunity to consider, Now
there I disagree with you, because actually think I am asking the fictional Scarlett O'Hara to give up some space.
All right. Yes.
Actually, in that original text, she took up all the space, and the Black people were ornamental.
Yes, that's right.
In fact, Cinderella wants to share space with a variety of people, but sometimes I don't think it's at the price of making, I respect the humanity of all people. I do believe, and this is not race-based, this is people-based.
Yeah.
Some people want more than their fair share.
I agree with that.
That greed is real.
Yeah.
And that one of the realities is when people want more than their share of the land, more than their share of the food, that they don't want, it's one problem to figure out how to divide the pie equally. It's another problem when you don't even think, when you are actually happy that you have a lot more and some other people have a lot less.
Yeah. And
those are some real conversations, because sometimes equity requires at times that you give up some things. And I am very happy to give up certain things. I pay a lot of taxes. I have never sought out how not to pay taxes because, for example, taxes support public education. I've hardly ever gone to public school, but I believe in those things. I am willing to give up some things. I've given up a lot of my life in the last year to try to help contribute to ending the pandemic earlier, because I would probably have very good healthcare if I got sick. I have insurance, all sorts of things, but I don't want to make other people who don't have that. At one hand, now I resent the young people who, and it's not just young people, but a lot of our young people going out on spring break and that don't seem to be concerned because they don't get bad cases of this. That's only some. There's some young people who've been incredibly diligent and volunteering and doing things. But my point is, that's a big question that people do have to ask. That one of the first steps in equity is, and I'll switch on something just again personal, is are you willing to give up your privilege in this sense? When you have a child and you're Black, the first thing you pray that that child is brilliant or pretty, because ordinary, mediocre Black people don't do well in this world. One of the privileges of being, like I said to my daughter, just to take the second President Bush, she was, I think, a C student at Andover and got to go to Yale. There's no Black person who's a C student at Andover and gets to go to Yale in the first place and then gets to be president. Barack Obama did well in college.
Yeah.
And he didn't do perfectly in high school, but he wasn't a C student, I don't think. So the point is, but my point is, I want all students to have a chance to thrive. And that may mean no grades for anyone.
Yes.
But I actually want all students to have a chance to thrive, to be accurately measured, for us to try to figure out not so much how to measure them, but to put them in a place where they will engage and do their best.
And Alice, because I have to jump in and just say that what I meant, and this is connected to, I'm going to come right back to what you said about no one is diminished. I actually I don't believe that somebody giving up space becomes diminished. I actually think that, and that's part of the problem, because for some who don't want to give up space that they've had, who don't want to give up privilege, they probably believe that they're going to be diminished. And I'm trying to say, well, no, you're not diminished. Like if you giving up space, I would argue that actually expands the possibility and the potential of who you can be in relationship. Because if you actually believe that you're moving through and everything is happening all because you pulled up them bootstraps all by yourself, that will be your first problem, because that is actually not how the world works, right? And so for me, it is actually saying, I believe there can be space for other stories. Actually, we can get away from the center to the margin thing, which I don't think is a good model. So let's get in a relational model so that it's not anything. Whiteness doesn't have to be centered. We don't have to center anybody. We just have to say that it's about the relationship and what do we understand about that.
And we can center everybody.
Yeah,
I actually think that's that. So we can center everyone and realize everyone gets to star in their story. And then we need to all play supporting roles in other people's. That's one of those things I love about Bob Dylan when he said, you've got to serve somebody. That everybody has to be willing to take both of those roles and multiple roles, to play the support role and play the star.
Yes.
Not at the same moments. But the same way when you talked about you could find yourself in any book, I was thinking about Harry Potter, the most important.
Yes.
The most important, not most important, but the most successful book of the modern era. Girls will read boy stories, but they think they've got lots of studies that show boys won't read books starring girls. Girls and Black people and other minority groups have had to learn to be multiculturally competent,
yes,
to speak multiple languages. Unfortunately, people in the majority often literally find it very hard to read their way into the stories of others, yes, and allow that general humanity to read. That's why we have, and it gets so perpetuating because we have very few mega books starring girls.
When I was growing up, one of the owners that my parents worked for gave my brothers a whole set of the Hardy Boys. And those of you who are younger won't know, but the Hardy Boys, it was like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. And the Hardy Boys were always doing adventures and in the outdoors. I read the entire thing. It didn't, you know, it's about these young white boys. I didn't care. I was like, I want to read the Hardy Boys. So I read it all. It's like the idea that in my own innocence, as I was just going to read what's available. You know, when my aunt bought me though, Alice Walker's A Color Purple. And I think it was, now I'm like in my early 20s or no, maybe in my teens, I can't remember, but I was, the first page blew my mind because it's from the perspective of a quote unquote uneducated 13-year-old Black girl.
And she's writing a letter to God. She's doing something
right.
so
I was just like, I remember
she's writing letters. She's writing.
I had to take a break. Like I got through the first 2 pages and I put it down like that. Wait, that my head just like, I don't even know how to handle that because she's actually the closest to me physically than, and I was an avid book reader when I was a kid. So I read everything. At least I thought I was reading everything, you know. James.
No, I definitely started on one in the library on the left-hand upper corner of the young adult novels, and I read across. So I remember when the Wuthering Heights.
Q&A. We're both looking at it.
I remember reading Wuthering Heights, but Jane Eyre I could read into the whole because she was a domestic servant.
Yes.
And so many Black women have read into the Jane Eyre experience.
Yes.
Their family experience of domestic servitude, but that's something that we've had to get good at is finding ourselves in all the stories. And it's complicated because not everyone has had to learn that lesson.
No.
And so when we write, one of the most tragic moments I ever had in publishing was I wrote a young adult novel called Diary of B.B. Bright, Possible Princess. And it's a sort of Jungian fairy tale. And it's all set on this wonderful island. And the girl has 3 amazing godmothers who represent all kinds of different kinds of Black female power. And the publisher, a big publisher, loved the book. They said, she's so smart. She has her own candle business and she's a philanthropist. And they said, there's only one thing we want to change.
Oh, the color of her skin. I know it.
They want her, they said, can she be white?
Yeah, that's it. I knew it.
They said, she's so intellectual, no one is going to believe this, that they are, and I said, and they said she can still have those same godmothers, those Black godmothers, but since her mother, can she? And I said, no, she can't be white.
She can't be.
It doesn't mean that there aren't white girls just like her, but white girls can read her.
That's right.
Boys can read her, but they are going to read her as B.B. Bright, you know, who has color the skin of toasted almonds, all of these things. She was written for my daughter. These are the books Caroline has actually read. She's reading Douglas and Princess de Clèves. She's reading a world of books. And I literally went to an independent publisher because they said, but white girls aren't going to read this. If you make her white, Black girls will read her. I said, they won't read her because you don't give them this. You're not trying. You're depriving the other readers of her. And I said, I want to, but.
I think we're going to open it up because I think we're
some of the questions here.
Yes, to questions. Mel and Sydney, should we, because we'll keep going.
Yeah.
You and I will keep going, right?
Yeah, so we have one question and also feel free to ask more questions in the chat. So from Rigo Melgar, he would love to hear your thoughts about being a minority and being called stubborn by white superiors when you push back about impositions that can end up being detrimental to you. How can we deal with confronting those situations in academia?
Oh, I have a lot to say about that. So
go first.
Yes, let me say, first of all, Rigo, great question. And I'm just saying for me, I stopped calling myself a minority. So part of it was my own psychological framing. What do I have control over? And I understand how minority is used in a lot of different ways, but minority also puts me on the margins, on the edge. There's a way within which I'm less than. Actually, I don't even call myself that. I'm definitely different, and I understand what that is. I get incredibly creative, and I made choice. That's why I left academia a couple of years ago. I'm doing this residency, but that relationship, I work together with some folks at Middlebury in the Franklin Environmental Center. I always have to call out Nan Jinx for that and say, we worked on months, what can this relationship look like? How can we both be served? How can we show up wholly and do this work together? Which was a dream of mine to be able to do that, because my experiences of working in some academic institutions was how quickly they wanted to either assimilate me, shrink me, or just not see me. But even though they recruited me, I was always recruited, because of my difference. And I mean, there's a lot of things I can say about that. So part of it for me, and what kind of kept me on the straight and narrow, was having some older and wiser friends. My friend Kaylin Tutrees said to me when I was going through a lot of this turmoil when I was at UC Berkeley as a professor, was, what is your intention? Or when the poet Nikki Finney said to me, don't forget who you are. And just, remembering those things, like, how am I centered? Where do I stand upon? Because there will always be people who will want to challenge who you are, because at the end of the day, you're not actually the problem. The problem is in them, right? You are just a reminder and or a reflection, or if they're more optimistic, an opportunity. But they don't, so they will call it stubborn, they will call it wrong, they will call it less than, they will call it, it's not rigorous, you're not disciplined. I mean, I can think of all the terms and all the ways. And who is your support system? What is your intention to do what it is you want to do and how you want to show up? How do you understand yourself in relationship to them, the department, the institution, and we can go on and say the world? That is the place that nobody can move you from unless you let them. It doesn't mean it won't hurt. It doesn't mean, oh, my friend Marguerite Brown said to me, listen, when you're at the front of the line doing things innovative and different, you have to expect to get arrows in your ass. Right? And I love that, because I was like, that means you just have to wear more padding. Right? So there's adjustments that you can make without giving up your own ability to be upright in who it is you are and what it is you want to be. And my heart is open. I understand that my work is to work in a way. It doesn't mean I don't get angry. It doesn't mean that sometimes I have to keep some people at arm's distance because they're hurting me. They're doing violence to my psyche and to my person, right? And so I have to keep them here. But I'm not interested in being unkind. I don't have to oppress in order to make a point about people who are trying to oppress me. I do not have to borrow that model. I've got too many examples of people who show up differently. And I've read too many books and seen too many stories of all kinds of people all over the world. Some who have a lot, some who seem to have a little, but live their life so fully and richly grounded in things that I truly believe in: the heart, the possibility, the potential of who we are as human beings. And what people have always heard me say, no one's going to make me give up my humanity. No one's going to make me give that up in how I treat others, as well as how I treat myself.
And I think that is a really passionate and true answer. I think that I would say that you are the authority on you. That is the first thing that I would just say. You are the authority on you. And the challenge is to figure out how you can, and it is great to be stubborn, to be hard-headed, if what that means is that you are maintaining that you are the authority on you. So the question is, how do you get meaningful or useful to you critique? Because no one is perfect. Because one of the things is, if you're very, very strong, if you're not in a position to get useful feedback, it's hard to improve. Now, many people, and it sounds like some people you're encountering, you need to understand that they are misunderstanding you.
Yeah.
And that someone who's misunderstanding you is not providing you with useful critique. And your job is to actually protect yourself from that language, that intrusion, as you want to put it. And I think that one of the things you can help but do is label it in a, you can put on a mask, a smile, and you can say, I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding many things about my circumstance and this conversation. I am not sure whether you are in a position to be interested or capable of understanding more, but I don't think these comments are, I want to improve because everyone improves and I have a growing edge. But you're misunderstanding so many things about this understanding, even what the difficulty of doing this is. I will just say that, and I think if you just hold your ground, that you make it being clear that you are the authority on you, that you are open to criticism and want to grow, but you are not open to irrelevant, ungrounded criticism that makes no sense because they have misunderstood something. Recently, I was on talking about something with food in a different context. I don't want to say exactly what. And the people were basically saying, but everything you're saying is so painful. And we're talking about some really important things about race, food in the South. And I just want to say that I want you to know that this is actually traumatic. When you want me to come and talk about off record about kitchens, that my grandmothers were conceived in kitchen rapes. This is not just entertainment to me. That talking the most fun, pretty food discussion, I can cook a coulibiac and I love a great meal and I love food history. But pain comes with it when I'm telling that story. That's part of my reality. Not everyone is going to be equal to your genius, Rico. That you have to, not everyone deserves your truth.
That's right.
And so that my advice is, not everyone deserves your truth. And that the road to the top, is always, particularly for people, if you want to call yourself minority, understand yourself to minority, is usually original. And one of the things I would say is, so know your own worth.
Yes.
And also don't deal with people unless you absolutely have to, who can only say no, who are not in a position to say yes. And don't deal with people who are never going to say yes.
Yes.
So if the person is not going to say yes or doesn't have, can only say no, avoid them. And avoid them can mean, when I go back to my undergraduate career, I had a professor who came and told me afterwards that he gave me a lower grade than I deserved. On purpose, for complicated, strange reasons, had to do with something that we call sexual harassment today, and that I was paying no attention. He actually came and told me this. And then I had another case where a lot of things went together and the person was being so traumatic and racist to me, I just couldn't perform. And I failed that class at the end. I went into the final exam with an A, but the racism, all the things I was experiencing. And you know what? I just won the biggest teaching award at Vanderbilt University last year. It did not stop me on my road to the top. My road to the top included having one F and some grade that not as high as I, but it also included writing an honors thesis, and it also included 5 books. I can tolerate some people completely misjudging me, because if I didn't, I would not have a life. Because to be me and go out in the world is to be misjudged every week.
Yes.
And to be
well said.
But so find some people who do give you criticism that you value. But the other one, stubborn, is one of the best things. When you are in and self-defining.
Yes.
You might say that, you know what, I don't trust anyone to criticize my work but me. That's why a good team, one of the things I ask all my students to do is to do their own evaluations. I always ask them, before I give any grades, how would you grade this in writing? Because I can be wrong and I want to close the gap. I want to see what they think. What do you think is your best work? How do you assess this? And ultimately, whether I assess it differently, you need to finally stick with your own assessment. That is an important part of, we talk about man with nature, but there's also man against nature. Call of the what? Nature is cruel. In Nashville, we've had a tornado, a derecho, and a flood in the last 14 months. It's not just people that are hard. Nature is cruel too at times, right? We've got to learn to be ourselves in the face of the sunshine and the storming rain.
Yes, that's all well said. I wrote down that everyone deserves your truth. That for me is a really powerful one to remember.
That's my one I tell my daughter the most often. you did, I wouldn't, that not everyone deserves your truth.
That's nice. Do we have another question?
Yes, so the next question that we'd like to pose is, how have your experiences as Black women influenced your right to both of you all? So I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay.
Have your experiences as Black women influenced your writing style and changed the course of your work? How important is your identity as a Black woman to your craft?
Well, so two things for me. My first, in terms of the way that I work, the first thing that I am and I rely upon is being able to speak. And this comes from my theater background, so my communication, that's what I privilege. The second thing that I privilege is writing. So I really, because with respect to someone like Alice, people who I know who writing is the primary way that they kind of communicate and work, it's the secondary thing that I do, and we can have a longer conversation about why that is. I kind of move back and forth, but I really like to write. I like to do that too. It's a great way to, for me to explore, the story, voice, ideas, get them on paper. For me as a Black woman, yes, everything. I would say everything, because those are two of the things that I am. So for an authentic voice, and I'm not a person, I don't write fiction. I'm not, that's not where I go. I like to tell, I don't know, story, but through memoir, through, I don't even know, the lyrical, people have called it different things. So I just let other people say, what do you call this essay that I just did? Pseudo poetry, lyrical essay, creative essay. I just say essay, I don't even know anymore. But it's sort of the way I'm able to show up. I think about rhythm and I think about improvisation and the sound of my writing. When I write it, and I have to say it out loud and feel the rhythm of the voice and what I'm saying and how it's connected to something authentic and real. And I know there's, good grammar and all those things too, but they don't always come. That's not the first thing I think of. It's the rhythm. And I'm like that with the way that I talk and sort of show up. And I don't want to make some culturally inappropriate statement like, Black people in rhythm. And I can say for me, in terms of the music of how I've lived my life, and that sort of that rhythm is just natural for me in a very particular way. I'm not essentializing it and connecting it to race. But since the question is, as a Black woman, that's how I understand myself in part, is in that way, with sort of a rhythm, a music, a way of hearing, a way of seeing the world. And many of you, people have heard me talk, know that I talk from a Black experience, not the Black experience, but a Black experience, because there's diverse Black experience, as Alice was saying. And I talk from a Black experience. It's hard for me not to talk about, both my grandmothers were maids in white kitchens, right? So that's a lot of people can claim that. I can too. And that's very particular to a Black experience, which isn't to say there are non-Black people, women who are also maids, but there's something about that. There's a way that I understand that. I understand it with the way that, a lot of stories that I've had throughout my life that people have called out my race and bad and sometimes good ways, right? It shows up. In this last year, it's never been so much more present, for me, in the way that people have come to me, because in part, that's why they wanted me to talk about this stuff, right? I don't know that people would be asking me if I was white, even if I knew everything that I knew, but would I know everything that I know if I was white? That's the thing, because a lot of the way that I know what I know is because I'm Black. So yes, it has influenced the way that I write. But more importantly than that, and the last thing that I will say, because I really want Alice to come in, is I'm influenced by the way I write because I'm a human being, and I'm always trying to get at what does it mean to be fully human. I've always been in love with Carl Sagan. And when Carl Sagan wrote, the book, Contact, they made it into a movie with Jodie Foster that I love. But when I read the book about it and I didn't realize after I saw the movie and was in love with it, I had no idea. And then I realized it was Carl Sagan. Then I read the book and said, this man wrote a book where a woman was the central character. And it was really a book about relationship. It wasn't just about, is there a life beyond this earth? That was a big question he was asking. But in the end, it is about relationship and how we are with who we are with, you know, how we are with who we are with, and also this planet on which we live. And for me, it was a conversation about how are we human? You know, that's for me the exploration in speaking with people, in writing, in exploring stories that I feel like haven't been told, and exploring my own story. That's really what I guess that's it. That's what I can say about that. So the Black woman thing is part of it, because it's part of, for me, of how I am human. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Oh, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think of it a little as a fiction writer. It's funny, in my fiction, I definitely write as a Black woman. And one of the reasons is that the novel is, you know, 300 years old. We go back to Fielding and Richardson. Richardson wrote Pamela and Fielding wrote Shamala, you know, right? And the novel was born in the West. I actually think in the West, from The Red and the Black, Tolstoy, Pushkin, the great human novels have been written. Jane Austen, we have 300, that's why some people say the novel is dead. But the novels of the interior of the Black female imagination haven't been written.
Yeah.
So in fact, I think of myself, the most Black woman, totally identity-driven thing I do is taking up space as a Black woman novelist. Because as it's so much in all that human, those amazing novels that I do see myself in, Mansfield Park of Jane Austen, to Arna Bontemps novels and everything in between, and certainly Zora Neale Hurston, but so much how Black people imagine themselves in nature in America. I got to write that fresh. It's like I'm Richardson and Fielding. So little has been done about Black interior lives. And when you talk about nonfiction, because so much of the Black experience in America was an experience of an illiterate and English people, that so little is documented, so little record keeping. If we confine ourselves only to written records and archaeology, like fractions of people still.
Right.
So I love imagining myself into the space. I love researching to imagine. And I think, to me, privileging also a Black female audience, although my books are written, I say the Black girl magic runs straight to Black bottom, but the wisdom of Black bottom is for everyone. I believe all human beings can, the same way I could find truth in Jane Austen and Tolstoy, there's universal truth, but I'm writing in Black female language. And so what I am really reclaiming, so there's a circularness to it, there is an aesthetic of swagger to it.
Yeah, swagger.
Witness to it. You know, it's one thing people will say to well-raised white children from privileged background, you know, that they're teaching them to be humble, to be modest. Well, when you tell a poor Black child to be humble, to be modest, it's a completely different thing. They've been told to play low. You need to be telling, chin up, have pride, say it loud. Everyone does it. Equity is not everyone getting or being the same thing.
Yes.
It is everyone getting or being the balancing thing that brings, so it depends on what you already have had too much of, what you need now. So, and to me, Black language is also, being a Black female novelist, is to privilege my Black female audience, inviting in all audience, but considering the needs and thoughts of, and that audience is many, many people, it's not everyone, but thinking about the Black female audience. For example, not having to describe, in my books, I have to say if someone's white, I assume the default state is you're Black. In many novels, if a person is Black, they describe them as Black, and they don't say that they never said Scarlett O'Hara was white. They said that, so to me, the default state is feminine, it's interior. I think of the lunar cycle, the cyclicalness of things. I think about little telling, sharp details, but also certain kind of swagger of overstatement that is the truth, that the lie that tells the truth that isn't meant to be a lie, but is meant to enclose a story within a story within a story.
Yes. There was an article written a few weeks ago. Whoever asked that question, you can find it online. It was by a Black writer named Maura Cheeks, and it was in the Paris Review. And the title says is something like, are we overdoing Black representation, or something about Black representation? But the thing I want to tell you about that struck me was, she said that she was talking about the author Fran Lebowitz. And Fran Lebowitz had made a comment, I believe, to the director Martin Scorsese, to say she doesn't understand why so many people want to see themselves in books, because she goes, books aren't supposed to be mirrors, they're supposed to be doors. And Maura Cheeks, the Black writer of the article, said, Fran Lebowitz doesn't know what she has. It's because she's always seen herself. So she's making that statement. Later on in the article, Fran Lebowitz is in a conversation with Toni Morrison, the Black writer, right? And she's kind of saying the same thing. And she says to Toni, but Toni, you're not your reader. But Toni said, but yes, I am. I am also the reader, which is something that I hear Alice saying, something that I'm always feeling. It's not so much that I'm writing for myself, but it's a mirror. And I understand the power of a door and a mirror. And why do we have to be one or the other? Why can't it be a door and a mirror, right?
And a window. And it's funny.
And a window, right?
I must consider myself to be a feminist. And a lot of feminists think that princess stories are bad, but that's because they've already always had princess stories like them. And they think of it as one way. I feel the deprivation of not having the princess stories, and wanted to write a very different kind of empowered princess story, but in a princess story. But I do find, but I note that I want it to be universal ultimately, but it's very particularly grounded in a Black and feminine aesthetic that allows me to take, life, friendship as essentially important.
Yeah,
that's part of my Black women. Black women love their, this writer, they're our friends, our friendship, sister friends, our fictive family, fictive kin. These are all very important things, and we still haven't had. There's still so many untold stories in the Black experience, in the Black American experience, let alone in the global Black experience.
Yeah,
there's so many untold stories that it's still extremely exciting. There might be very few unwritten songs now. We've had so much productivity, but there is still so much untold stories in both fiction and nonfiction. And when you think about stories that involve the environment in fiction or nonfiction, there's still so many.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of a novel that is really centered on a Black woman hiking across a desert.
Yeah.
I can't think, that it's few and far between that even have lots of Black people swimming at a beach. One of the things before we finish, I wanted to think, because I love them, and we have and I think when I think of Middlebury, and I've only had a chance, I was there for a wedding. Some people that I really treasured who loved Middlebury, and one of them had gone to Middlebury, that it is a place out of time, that it is a little bit of a retreat from the world, an idyllic village. And I love the times when Black people have tried to create spaces like that for ourselves, whether it's Idlewild.
Idlewild is what I was thinking too.
Or Bluff and Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, that was the other one. Yes.
And a wonderful one where Frederick Douglass on the Eastern Shore, Sag Harbor, that these communities, but I really am also very interested right now in utopian, intersectional, diverse communities. And I think that I would love to see there be a new movement of intentional, diverse communities for vacations that are intentionally trying to be utopian. Because if you can practice it in your time out of time, we might find some things to illuminate our time back in the world. That I think that that is really just interesting to think about. What would a diverse utopian vacation village look like in America? And part of that would be privileging some part of it, the people, the original people of that land, and giving them back their space first and seeing how they would invite us in.
We are down to about 5 minutes left. I've just been notified. Are there any more? Is there a last question? Something we can kind of come to? Alice and I can we come to it succinctly? I'm not so sure because we got stuff to say, but yes.
Yeah, I actually have a question. So you talked a lot about creating community, and so I kind of wanted to know, how do you strive to create, like what Martin Luther King once said, a beloved community, and one that accepts one another and everyone despite race or difference? And how do you see that happening, whether it's through music or through relationships with the environment? So yeah.
I want to, for me, that very much is my classroom. That is why I am in the academy and been here for 14 years, is that I truly think of every class I put together as a little town, as a community that is beloved by me. And I truly try to get the students in the seminar to respect and connect with each other, and that it feels like a place, a university at its best is a place where people from all over the world meet. And I remember having two students from the same small town in China, but one came from a very wealthy background and one came from a very not wealthy background in the same town. And on the plane, even to the States, one was in first class and one was in coach. And they said the only place, they never had spoken. These two women had lived in the same small town and never spoken till they were in a space I invited them into at Vanderbilt. And to me, that, I remember having a white supremacist kid that I was teaching in a certain way at Vanderbilt. And by the end of the year with me, that person had Black friends and was at a Thelma and the Sleaze, which is a lesbian feminist band, concert with me. And we were respecting and caring, because when he first told me something about his ideology, his parents, and I just said, that saddens me. And, that his ideology, and he was willing to walk away from that ideology and to walk into, he wanted to know why he couldn't call somebody the N-word. And I wanted to, it took everything in me to sit down and say that is heartbreaking to me. And when I said to him, well, maybe how would you feel if someone was calling your sister, bitch or hoe? He said, I hate that. I said, well, that's how I feel if you're going to call another student, and you want the N-word and that. And it was a way in. He could hear that the words hurt. He said, I just mean, it's what everyone says. It's funny, this, that, the other. But my point being, there are people who are unredeemable, but I feel that in one of the things in university space, when it's at its best, it's where the ends of the world can connect. And I hope that universities don't go in for so much polarization and don't go in for so much. We need to call in more than we call out.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna, we got 2 minutes, and actually you said it so well. I think the only thing that I would add is to say that for myself is deciding, how to meet people where they are. I think, having been fortunate and privileged enough to travel, I meet so many interesting people just on the road, just out, whether, really, if I get invited to speak in Telluride, Colorado, or Appleton, Wisconsin, I go to both, or London. It doesn't matter for me. I mean, yeah, I may like one more than the other or feel some resonance with more than the other, but I try to go in with an open mind and to say, because you never know who you're going to meet, how you're going to show up, how to respond to that. I think part of it for me is how to meet people where they are and know thyself, because you can best meet people where they are by first knowing thyself. So you know how to bring yourself into those moments, those opportunities, and that potential.
And we can only meet people in reality, even though this is virtual. Right. So people who
Except in Alice Randall's fictional novels. That's
COVID
why we
is a
get to
kind
live.
of reality, but when you're like think that COVID isn't real, like you can only meet people in reality. So we have,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
see, note if they are available. If they are in reality, then we can
Yeah.
close the gaps. You all are so lucky to have Carolyn Finney on your campus and to have, as an artist in residence, a thinker in residence, a lover of this earth and other people. And I think that that you started off saying this is a weary time, and this is a weary time. And there's been so much isolation in this time.
Yes.
And I think that what I hope we've given radically, joy is radical.
Yes.
And that is a theme we both share.
Yes.
And I think that what I want to extend to you and to everyone on this Zoom is some radical joy of shared place and respect, some radical willingness to note when we misunderstand, to commit to being better, but also commit to enjoying the reality that we are so vividly right now.
Yes.
Exactly as we are. And some parts horribly wrong for things that have happened in the past, the taking of land that we cannot fix immediately. But we are also vividly right in the joy right now, if we extend it to everyone else. So I think we are. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, Alice Randall, my God, you're so fabulous. I took so many notes. I was like, Alice Randall, thank you. I feel like we're friends now, so this is good.
I feel like we're twins separated.
I bet we are. I'm going. That's what I'm going to tell everybody. Thank you so much for joining us all here at Middlebury. I appreciate it. There's more that I will say about that off camera, but I'm so happy that you were here with your brilliant, fabulous self. Sydney and Mel, I'm so glad to get to know you. I know you're in my class, and we're going to continue, throwing down and talking up all kinds of good things. And I so appreciate you taking the time tonight to moderate this conversation. Janet and Danielle, thank you for helping to hold the container here so we could have everybody else come in and join us, and everybody who joined us tonight with your great questions and your active listening and just your openness. I'm thrilled. Thank you for that. And yeah, let's go with Alice's radical joy. I'm about it. Thank you.